create frames using tweening. Create frames using tweening. The term tweening is derived from in betweening, the traditional animation term used to describe this process. By the way, tweening, also called interpolating, and significantly reduces the time required to create animation effects such as fading in or fading out, fading in or fading out, or moving an element across a frame. And you can edit 20 frames individually after you create them. And also you can use the tween command to automatically add or modify a series of frames between two existing frames and varying the layers properties like position or opacity or effect parameters, and vary between the new frames to create the appearance of movement. For example, if you want to fade out a layer, set the opacity of the layer in the starting frame to 100%, and then set the opacity of the same layer in the ending frame to 0%. And when you tween between the two frames, the opacity of the layer is reduced evenly across the new frames, by the way, like the next image and the next screenshot now. Using tweening to animate text position, we have steps. Step number 1. To apply tweening to a specific layer, you should select it in the layers panel. And step number 2, you should select a single frame or multiple continuous frames. And if you select a single frame, you can choose whether to tween the frame with the previous frame or the next frame. And after that, if you select 2 continuous frames, new frames are added, by the way, between the frames. And if you select more than 2 frames, existing frames between the first and last selected frames are altered, by the way, by the tweening operation. And if you select the first and last frames in animation, these frames, by the way, are treated as continuous, and tweened frames are added after the last frame. This tweening, by the way, method is useful when the animation is set to loop multiple times. Step number 3. Do one of the following. You should click the tweens button in the timeline panel. After that, choose tween from the panel menu. Step number 4. Specify the layer or layers to be varied in the added frames. We have options here now. The first option, all layers. All layers is meaning various. All layers in the selected frame or frames. After that, selected layer is meaning various. Only the currently selected layer in the selected frame or frames. And step number 5. Specify layer properties to be varied. Specify layer properties to be varied. We have options here again now. Position. Position is meaning varies the position of the layer's content in the new frames evenly between the beginning and ending frames. And opacity is meaning varies the opacity of the new frames evenly between the beginning and ending frames. And effects is meaning varies the parameter setting of layer effects evenly between the beginning and ending frames. And step number 6. 6 is if you selected a single frame in step 2, you should choose where to add frames from the tween with menu. And you have options again here now. Next frame. Next frame is meaning add frames between the selected frame and the following frame. This option, by the way, is not available when you select the last frame in the timeline panel. And after that, first frame is meaning add frames between the last frame and the first frame. This option, by the way, is available only if you select the last frame in the timeline panel. And previous frame. Previous frame is meaning add frames between the selected frame and the preceding frame. This option, by the way, is not available when you select the first frame in the timeline panel. And the next option, last frame. Last frame is meaning add frames between the first frame and the last frame. This option, by the way, is available only if you select the first frame in the timeline panel. And step number 7. In the frames to add box, you should enter a value or use the up or down arrow key to choose the number of frames. This option, by the way, is not available if you selected more than 2 frames. Step number 8. Click OK. How to add a new layer for each new frame. How to add a new layer for each new frame. By the way, to create new layer for each new frame command automatically adds a new layer visible in the new frame but hidden in other frames. This option, by the way, saves time when you are creating an animation that requires you to add a new visual element to each frame. And you have to choose create new layer for each new frame from the timeline panel menu. Then a check mark indicates that the option is turned on. And how to hide layers in animation frames. Hide layers in animation frames is meaning when you create a new layer, it's visible in all animation frames by default. To show new layers only in active frames, deselect new layers visible in all frames from the timeline panel menu. And to hide a layer in a specific frame, you should select the frame, and then hide the desired layer in the layers panel. How to specify a delay time in frame animations? How to specify a delay time in frame animations? By the way, you can specify a delay the time that a frame is displayed for single frames or for multiple frames in an animation. Delay time is displayed in the seconds, by the way, and fractions of a second are displayed as decimal values. For example, 1/4 of a second is specified as 25. If you set a delay on the current frame, every frame, by the way, you create after that will remember and apply that delay value. We have steps. Step number 1, should select one or more frames in the timeline panel. Step number 2, should click the delay value below the selected frame to view the pop-up menu. Step number 3, specify the delay, and you should choose a value from the pop-up menu. Then the last value used appears at the bottom of the menu. After that, choose Other and enter a value in the set frame dialog box, and then click OK. And if you selected multiple frames, specifying a delay value for one frame applies the value to all frames. How to choose a frame disposal? How to choose a frame disposal method? By the way, the frame disposal method specifies whether to discard the current frame before displaying the next frame, and you select a disposal method for animations that include background transparency to specify whether the current frame will be visible through the transparent areas of the next frame, like the next screenshot and the next image now. Frame disposal methods: A is meaning frame with background transparency with restore to background option, and B is meaning frame with background transparency with don't dispose option. And by the way, the disposal method icon indicates whether the frame is set to don't dispose or dispose. No icon appears when disposal method is set to automatic. We have steps. Step number 1, you to select a frame or frames for which you want to choose a disposal method, by the way. Step number 2, right click if you use Windows or control click if you use macOS, and the frame thumbnail to view the disposal method context menu. Step number 3, should to choose a disposal method and you have options here now. The first option, automatic. Automatic is meaning determines a disposal method for the current frame automatically, and discarding the current frame if the next frame contains layer transparency for most animations, and the automatic options default yields the desired results. And note, and be careful here please now. To preserve frames that include transparency, select the automatic disposal option when you are using the redundant pixel and removal optimization option. And don't dispose is meaning preserve the current frame as the next frame is added to the display, and the current frame and the preceding frames may show through transparent areas of the next frame, and you can't use a browser to see an accurate preview of an animation using the don't dispose option. And what about dispose? Dispose is meaning discards the current frame from the display before the next frame is displayed, and only a single frame is displayed actually at any time. And the current frame doesn't appear through the transparent areas of the next frame. And what about specify looping in frame animations? Specify looping in frame animations. By the way, you can select a looping option to specify how many times the animation sequence repeats when played. We have steps. Step number 1, should click the looping option selection box at the lower left corner of the timeline panel. Step number 2, you should select a looping option once 3 times forever or either. Step number 3, if you selected either, enter a value in the set loop count dialog box and then click OK. Note here, and be careful please now. Looping options can also be set in the Save for Web dialog box. For more information, see Save for Web and Devices overview. And what about delete? Delete an entire animation. Delete an entire animation. You can choose delete animation from the timeline panel menu.